The Emperor. The sign of the Hebrew alphabet that corresponds to Arcanum IV is Daleth, its numerical value 4. The hieroglyph of the Arcanum is the breast, hence the idea of feeding and being fed. Food strengthens the creature and enables it to act and acquire authority in its environment. The card of the Arcanum features a man crowned with a triple tiara. This means that the principle exists in all three planes, and that this authority, to be real in any field, must extend to the three planes of this field. In the left hand, the man holds a scepter, surmounted by the sign of Venus, or the sign of Jupiter. The former means that it is indispensable to know how to create complex, individualized, and finished entities. The second simply indicates the astrological correspondence of the Arcanum, the planet Jupiter, with all the characteristics of the god Jupiter of mythology. The position of the man's arms and shoulders should form an ascending triangle. In many decks of the tarot, this particularity was omitted. The left leg is crossed with the right so as to form a cross with equal arms. Behind the figure there is a cubic stone in which is represented an eagle carrying around its neck the emblem called Cross of the Great Hierophant. The man rests his hand on the upper cube. Let us look at the explanation of these symbols. A cubic stone, evenly cut and smooth, is the symbol of all that has been worked and finished, receiving a definite form. It indicates that authority manifests itself through the forms previously well elaborated. Each side of the cube, of course, has a square, one of geometric symbols of this arcanum. The image of the eagle on the stone demonstrates the necessity of a great elevation of thought for one who intends to give things a finished form. It must be, say, an engineer and not just a labourer at work. This idea is confirmed by the presence in the Arcanum of the cross of the Great Hierophant. The line of the cross symbolises a channel leading to the lower end, the influence of the three planes of the universe, represented by three horizontal sleepers. To complete the shape, to polish the stone, it is necessary not only to grasp the idea of the thing in the highest, but able to pass it through the mental, astral, and physical planes and aspects of its realization. It is still necessary to explain the cross formed by the legs of the man. This cross with equal arms will be the second symbol of this arcanum, the first being a cubic stone, one of the names, Petra Cubica, of the arcanum. In common language, the name of the arcanum is the Emperor, because of the sceptre and the crown. In the sphere of the theosophical ternary, the titles of the arcanum will be the following: Form, in the plane of the archetype; Authority, in the plane of man; Adaptation, in the nature plane. Let us now turn to the interpretation of the quaternary, represented by the four arms of the cross. This one quaternary symbolises, first and foremost, a general scheme of every complete dynamic process in the universe. The active, masculine, expansive principle, Yod, fecundates the passive, feminine, attractive principle, He. From this union is born the neutral principle, androgynous Vau, which transmits to the lower plane all that is received from the superior. As soon as this scheme is realized, the idea of the family appears, that is, the idea of a completed cycle of manifestation. A statement of the fact of the existence of this idea is, as it were, to trace a contour line around the internal life of that family, and to note that an external life, this familiar nucleus, although composed, acts as an independent composite unit. When we simply state the presence of the completed Vau, Yod He Vau cycle, we put the fourth letter He after the letters recognizing the cycle as expired, the family formed, completed. Hence the designation of it with the passive letter He. It was made, it turned out. In this form, the quaternary of the elementary cycle will be symbolized by the third great name of God, Yod He Vau, and then the fourth He. The Kabbalah attributes to this name a miraculous force when correctly pronounced. Most likely, the high priest pronounced it on especially solemn occasions 3 times. The first time he spelled it in the usual way. The second time, dividing into 2 parts and reading the first name of the letter Yod, masculine, and the second etymologically Heva, feminine. It turned out as Yod He Vau or Yod He Vau. The third time the whole word was read etymologically. In all likelihood his pronunciation was Jove or Jav, but in any case not Jehovah, as some authors of the 18th century thought, based on conditional punctuation of the Hebrew text, referring not to this name but to another, replacing it during loud reading. In this way the Hierophant first pointed out the complete scheme of the elementary cycle, then the androgyny of humanity, and finally oneness and the Unitarian law in general. So that the profane could not hear the sacred name, the words of the Hierophant were muffled by the sound of some percussion musical instruments. The cycle of the name is distributed in the cross of the quaternary, being read the same on both directions of the rotating movement, referring to a diagram, cross in motion. Arrows indicate the right direction. The reading of the third divine name, written in reverse, results in the word which is considered a symbol of anarchy in the kingdom of the devil. This word is obtained when the rotary movement starts at one end of the horizontal line rather than at the top of the vertical line. Imagine now that our component unit, our family, featured in the second He of the holy name, actively exerts the influence on some element of the external world, that is, simply that our elementary cycle, by its completion, determines the beginning of a new cycle. Then, the passive symbol He is no longer suitable for the fourth element. This He, in a mysterious but natural process, passes into the Yod of the next cycle. Our cross, as it were, turns 90 degrees, becomes a circle, the so-called quaternary rotation in the Hermetic circle. This is not the place to describe the essence of this process. We restrict ourselves to stating the fact of the transition of the second He to the new Yod. This new Yod seeks or forms for itself a suitable He, fertilizes it. Thou is born, which leads to a second cycle. The fact of the existence of the second cycle, outlined either by the symbol He, if the second cycle is final, or by the sign of Yod, if it goes into activity, is ascertained, etc., to infinity. If we compare the series of elements obtained in the successive cyclic processes to a series of natural numbers, we can verify that in the last series, all multiples of 3 will correspond to Vau. Numbers which, according to the scheme of 3, take the place of the number 1 will correspond to Yod, and all who occupy the place of 2 will correspond to He. We then have a long sequence of numbers and letters. Thus, for example, the 58th element of the series will be a Yod, the 62nd a He, and the 75th a Vau. If the series ended on the 58th element, then we would call this element the second He. Examples of such series. The first element is the father, the second is the mother, the third is the child, the fourth is the influence of the whole family, or at least on another selected family, which will be the fifth element. This influence will give rise to the common interests of the two families. sixth element. The group of two families connected by these interests, the seventh element, acts well at least on another group of families, the eighth element, creating solidarity between both groups, the ninth element. Then we have a diagram of the formations of groups in general and states in particular. Another example. A genius, 1, facilitates the mind of a sage, 2, who lives in the world of abstractions. The wise man generating and transmitting the idea creates the possibility of formation of the androgynous element, 3, or human being. This, on the one hand, receives passively the food provided by the wise, and on the other hand, acts in the world according to the teaching received. If your behavior is more passive, He, the whole cycle will be characterized as passive intelligence. If it is active and becomes a Yod of the next cycle, 4, fertilizing the environmental capable of assimilating the new cultural impulse, 5, this cycle will be called active intelligence. Here then we have the scheme of the process of cultural transmission from the point of scientific and philosophical intuition. We can apply the same scheme to the field of aesthetics. Third example. Morning, 1, prepares and schedules the activity of the day, 2, the fruit of this activity appears at night, 3, and through the mysterious passage through the night becomes the starting point for the plans in the next morning, 4. The sowing of spring, 1, incubated by the summer conditions, 2, provides the autumnal harvest, 3, and the winter period determines the degree of activity in the following spring, 4. Applying all this to the scheme of the quaternary spin within the circle, we will have the following data. The trajectory of the displacement of the first quadrant Yod, the trajectory of the second quadrant, first He, the trajectory of the third quadrant, Vau, and the determination of the center. With this we will have the determination of the circumference, without which we would not be sure that the fourth element, the second He, having turned 90 degrees, would fall into the place of the Yod of the next cycle. Each cycle of initiation has 3 stages corresponding to the 3 quadrants of the emetic circle. In the 3 symbolic degrees of the legitimate ethical masonry of Ashmole and Flood, the Yod element is represented by the degree of apprentice. In this degree, the Freemason strives to know as much as possible and for perfection, and only then does he realize the darkness of ethical ignorance in which lives the common man. This degree, being active, requires hard work and is tiring. The very ritual of the apprentice degree is rich in symbolic allusions to errors, deviations from conduct, and painful trials of life. The He element in the Masonic initiation corresponds to the second degree, the companion, whose field of application is expanded. The companion enjoys the pleasant aspects of relationships with his brothers in arms, who, like himself, overcame the painful stage of apprentice. The ritual of degree symbolizes the pleasure of knowledge in general, and in particular all friendship, mutual help, and protection from experienced instructors. The Vau element corresponds to the third degree, that of master, already familiar with life in the Masonic environment, and requires the initiate to become familiar with the idea of death with all its implications. The Lodge of the Masters represents the synthesis of the entire Masonic family. If we consider a closed unit, it will correspond to the second He. If we consider it from the point of view of influence upon its environment, it will correspond to the new Yod. For a detailed acquaintance with the etiology of Freemasonry, I recommend the article by B. M. Pryamin Morozov, the journal ISIS, December, number, 1910 and January 1911. Essay on the etiology and general history of Freemasonry. It briefly outlines the dogma and ritual, the symbolism of the degrees of the disciple, comrade, and master, and the more detailed work of Papers, which is the genesis and the development of Masonic symbols. In the Russian translation, it contains, in addition to the analysis of the Hiram legend, a brief history of the most important Masonic currents due to the origin of 33 degrees. Returning to the numbering of the elements of the dynamic cycle, we draw attention to the possibility of analysing cycles of 9 elements and not 3 as we did before. The place of an element in the cycle of 9 is determined by the smallest positive subtraction according to the 9 modules. Thus, the 58-degree element of the series will be the 4th element of its cycle of 9, that is, the Yod of the second family of that cycle of 9. The 78th element of the series will be the 6th element of its cycle of 9, that is, the second family of the same cycle. We can get these results in a faster way, adding the figures of the number according to a well-known arithmetical method, which is there in a diagram. This calculation, which is called extracting the theosophical root from number, will be very useful in the future. To complete our presentation, we will add that if we apply to any number of the cycle of 3 the theosophical addition, that is, the addition of all natural numbers, including the number itself, we will obtain the following results. 1. If the number corresponds to 0, or to 3, which is the same, in the module of 3, the theosophic sum will also correspond to 0 in module 3. The agenda will remain ternary. If the number corresponds to 1 in the module of 3, its theosophical sum corresponds to 1 according to the module of 3. The unit remains a unity. If the number corresponds to 2 in the module of 3, its theosophical sum will correspond to 3 or 0, which is the same, according to the module of 3. The binary after synthesis no longer remains binary, but it neutralizes itself in ternary. These theorems can easily be demonstrated in general. Here we will limit ourselves to 3 particular examples according to the formula, according to a mathematical formula. Having analysed the quaternary as a general scheme of elementary dynamic processes, we will now turn to the symbolism of the cross with equal arms as a scheme of active manifestation and passive man on the astral plane. The vertical bar of the cross, which connects the Yod and the Vau, is divided into 2 parts by the central point. The from above Yod predominates over the below Vau, therefore the Yod is more active than the Vau. The upper part is considered as the field of positive actions of the human being, the field of the good, and the lower part as the field of negative actions, the region of evil. An initiate in every moment of life must discern between these 2 fields, remaining always at the neutral point. This is knowing the good and the evil of actions. The horizontal bar of the cross is also divided into 2 parts, both corresponding to the receptivity to the passive sphere of man. The right arm belongs to the second He, which can transform into Yod. This is therefore more active, dominates the left, and corresponds to the sphere of favourable reception. The left arm represents the sphere of unfavourable receptivity. An initiate has the ability to delimit at any moment of life clearly these 2 regions, that is, has the knowledge of the neutral point. In summary, on the basis of the new analysis of the cross, we can say that in order to control the authority, man must not only consider the good and evil of his actions, but also know how to use all external influences, both good and bad. He will know how to use both anger as well as the feeling of gratitude as stimuli of action, both tenderness and disappointment as means of quenching. The basis of man's authority is his ability to remain at the centre of the hermetic cross, in tune with all its elements, but remain the master of its spheres. From this analysis, we turn now to the traditional analogies of the quaternary elements. We associate the Yod element with what tradition calls air. The first He is with the earth, Vau with water, the second He is with fire. In ancient times, these 4 terms were called elements of the quaternary. In a metaphysical plane, air means time, water space, earth the principle of inertness of matter, fire the kinetic state of matter. Here we are in the field of theoretical mechanics. Morally, air indicates the need to dare for any initiate, water, the need to know, earth, the duty to remain silent, fire, to know how to desire. The notion of symbolic animals in the quaternary is associated with these designations. The eagle is bold, the man is knowing, the bull is silent, the lion is ardent in his desires. The contemporary emetices symbolize these four manifestations by the shaped emblem of crosses formed by gutters in which the horizontal corresponds to the receptivity in the given and the vertical ones to the momentum of the act. He who dares drowns in himself the consciousness of danger, the dark horizontal gutter, and wakes up activity, the light vertical gutter. He who is satisfied with his knowledge does not study and does not show activity, two dark gutters. He who is silent does not show himself, dark vertical gutter, but takes everything into account, light horizontal. He who desires is active and receptive. You need to know what you want. Both gutters are light. Going down into the physical plane, we will interpret the elements as four states of matter: earth, solid; water, liquid; air, gaseous; fire, radiation. Bringing this explanation closer to the analysis of the quaternary of human actions and perceptions, we clearly understand the following formulation of the theses of the occult classics about the so-called elementals. Man has a body made up of all four elements. It is synthetic. He knows the four sides of the cross. The elementals are subordinate to the authority of a balanced person. They do not know good and evil. They do not stand in the centre of the cross, but only live on its sides. The sylphs are in the air, undines in water, gnomes in the earth, the salamanders are on fire. Their bodies are composed of each of the materials of the element in which he lives. They merge with the elements themselves, and therefore they are not visible with the physical eye, are not heard with the physical hearing, etc., until they are manifested by a mediumistic loan of the elements of other elements. Then they can be contacted by physical organs. These elementals control the details of what we would call physical and chemical phenomena. It may be useful to give brief instructions on the distribution of the so-called alchemical elements in terms of the quaternary, the Tetragrammaton. The term air corresponds in alchemy to the universal solvent Zoth, the sign of which is a triple caduceus crowned by the wings of an eagle. The term water corresponds to metallogenic mercury, which can be extracted from mercury, the sign of its mercury. Azoth is often called the mercury of the sages or the mercury of the philosophers, but it must be firmly remembered that it cannot be extracted from metallic mercury. The term earth corresponds to the element of salt. The sign of it is salt. The term fire is an element of sulfur with the sign of sulfur. Sulfur and alchemical salt should not be confused with substances of the same name used in chemistry. In alchemy, these names indicate two attributed principles of bodies that can be neutralized by either the metallogenic mercury in the involutionary process or by the mercury of sages in the evolutionary process. In ethical hermeticism, which is the analogy of alchemy in the astral plane, to the element salt corresponds perseverance in the pursuit of improvement. To the element sulfur, the ardour of prayer or other modes of concentration. To the element mercury, the state of being aware. To the element azoth, a subtle sensibility and innate understanding of working conditions. Ethical hermeticism and alchemy are particular aspects of a general work known as the Great Work and symbolized by the 19th Arcanum. This enterprise can be defined as being a process of transmutation of a given environmental matter, its state, the most subtle it can achieve, without, however, exceeding the limits of its own medium, that is, retaining the same general qualifications to the plane to which it belongs. Alchemy deals with the great work of transmuting common metals, or even any material dross, into nobler metal, the gold. The purpose of ethical emeticism is to transform ethically inferior man into another, different, perfected being that, keeping the general characteristics of an incarnate human being, realizes in himself the synthesis of the qualities of an evolved soul. It is evident that each transmutation of this type is based on the principle of the basic substances in which transmutation is carried out. In other words, if any dross can be transformed into gold, it is because all material bodies present different modes of coagulation of the single basic substance. In the transformation of an inferior man into a higher man, the basic composition remains the same. The difference is only in the grouping of its astral elements, which in each one is different and varies to infinity. That which is in disorder is an inferior man, is perfectly ordered in the higher man. We also have the important question of the distribution of the cardinal points between the elements of the Tetragrammaton. The east corresponds to the Yod, the south to the second He, the west to Vau, and the north to the first He. Here we have diagrams of the quaternary of Ezekiel and the quaternary of John. East, air, time, dare, eagle. South, fire, kinetic state of matter, will, lion. West, water, space, know, human. North, earth, inertia, silence, the bull. This scheme is based on the apparent 24-hour solar movement, which takes place in the sense that we call it contrary. If we arrange the sacred animals as we have done so far, that is, eagle, east, air, bull, north, ground, man, west, water, lion, south, fire, we will have, as it were in a mirror, the reflection of the scheme given in the 1st and 10th chapters of the book of the prophet Ezekiel. The applications of Ezekiel's quaternary play an important role in the operations of invocation, a spinning movement called by us straight, that is, in counterclockwise, and conjuration clockwise. Another scheme given by the Apostle John in the 4th chapter of the Apocalypse presents the reflection of a similar image, which, however, differs from the first by the inversion in place of two elements. In it, the bull, earth, corresponds to the west, and man, water, to the north. This second scheme makes it possible to introduce certain foreign terms relating to qualifications and attributions, wet, dry, hot, and cold. Thus, the air would be moist and hot, water damp and cold, the earth cold and dry, fire dry and hot. These qualifications are widely used in astrology and alchemy. About the great arcanum of magic. A magic operation is any application of the human will, single or collective, to the solution of a task, the fulfillment of which depends on the activity of individualized entities operating in 2 or 3 planes. An example might be 1. A self-suggestion of something sharply determined. In this case, the process acts on the magician, a being living in the 3 planes, or on a part of its cells. 2. Any suggestion to another human being. Influence is again exercised on all 3 planes. 3. The acceleration or deceleration of any process in the elements. Influence acts on the elementals, therefore also in the 3 planes. 4. The evocation of an elemental, a bipolar being, who with the aid of a mediumistic loan can manifest itself in the 3rd plane. 5. The search or attraction of an astral cliché, influence encompassing 2 planes, or exteriorization of the elemental of the magician himself, that is, the influence on his own elemental, which can be considered as action on 2 planes. If the magic operation is directed at 3-tier entities, its effectiveness will depend on the preponderance of the capabilities of the operator over those of the entities to which the operation is directed. If the operation acts on entities of 2 planes, such as egregores, larvae, etc., then even if the forces on both sides are equal in both planes, the desired result can be achieved simply because the operator has the reinforcement of the 3rd plane, the physical. In this case, we say that to carry out the operation, the operator leaned on the physical plane. The point of physical support may be the operator's own body, the body of other beings, or material objects outside. From our definition of magical operation, we can conclude that it must be composed obligatorily of three elements. 1. The mental, that is, the idea of the operation, supported by an act of will. 2. The astral, which is the form, that is, the internal structure of the operation. 3. The physical, constituted by the aforementioned operation support points, that is, the symbols used, the resources of the operator's own body, the body of the entities of three planes that help in the operation. According to what we've learned about the oneness of the basic substance, all elements of mental, astral, or physical aspects of magical performance must be considered as individual manifestations, that is, as forming part of, respectively, a single mental element, the metaphysical axiom, of a single astral element, the universal whirlwind, or of a single physical element, the point of support in the physical plane. Moreover, the mental principle must give birth to the astral form. To this, by its condensation, will inevitably determine physical manifestation. This action, in its totality, that is, the metaphysical axiom, the astral swirl, and the physical manifestation, constitutes the great arcanum of magic. The great arcanum, being the key to the greatest human power, is never revealed to the disciple by the instructor for the following reasons. 1. If the disciple by himself did not gain the great arcanum in all its fullness, it is because in one of the three planes his or her development is incomplete. It cannot therefore be guaranteed that the revelation of the arcanum will not constitute a danger to the initiator himself. 2. The character of the great arcanum is subjective in its understanding and its application. As we will learn later, the spiritual monads of human beings already have the specific characteristics in their quality as universal collective man-self. We can say they have different colorations and shades. The astrosomes are also different and subject to different planetary influences. Not even bodies are the same. Thus, a schematic transmission of the great arcanum, though accompanied by the instructor, will not exempt the disciple from strenuous and prolonged work to adapt the scheme given by the instructor to his individual particularities and the conditions of his own life in the three planes. Consequently, what we say about the great arcanum will only be a development of their definition. The great arcanum, like all magical operations, must have in its composition the mental part. The operator should understand and determine the most complete operation. In other words, should be oriented perfectly about the character of each entity, should know its origin, he must know its parents mentally, that is, he must understand the matrimony of each odd with each hay on the mental plane. The key to this understanding is hidden in a static in the great law of the ternary. This law is symbolized by the ascending triangle, which constitutes the upper part of the scheme that alludes to the construction of the great arcanum of magic. The mental part of the arcanum, that is, the marriage of the determined Yod He, will give rise to the astral part, the mystery of the basic whirlwind, the vow, the son of matrimony. As we already explained in Arcanum IV, this whirlwind is bipolarized. In addition, it determines the passage of the mental to the physical and vice versa. In it lies the general mystery of involution and evolution. Graphically, it is shown in Figure 14, which is a seal of Solomon's six-pointed star, and the number corresponding to it is 2, while the part number metaphysics is 3. The astral swirls of the general type, when condensed, should lead smoothly to the sphere of elements, that is, to the physical world, mysteriously connected with the understanding of Arcanum IV. The realization of power over the elements corresponds to the second hay of the dynamic process of the great arcanum of magic. In the physical plane, he is represented by the valet, that is, the activity of our Yod He Vau family. In this part, synthesized and symbolized by Figure 15, we have the domain over the elements, the cross with equal arms with the mystery of its rotation within the hermetic circle, and the result of the application of this domain, one of the faces of the cubic stone, the square, which corresponds to the number 4. The general scheme of the Great Arcanum is presented graphically by the set of 3 symbols presented vertically. We repeat, the top is the metaphysical Great Arcanum ternary. The central part is the binary of the astral rotor, the swell. The lower part, the quaternary of the elemental root, or the mystery of achievement, the mystery of the point of support. The attainment of the higher part depends on the degree of the incarnation in the human being of the spiritual monad, which has always had the knowledge of the mystical marriage Yod He. For the realization of the intermediate part, man must create in himself astrally the androgynous vow. To perform the lower part, the physical, it is necessary, besides the creation of the astral androgyne, to know which instrument will serve as the physical support point of the operation, and to know the passage from this point in support of the astral swell. A purely logical method can help us to find this instrument. Let us try to make a part of the universe disappear mentally, giving what remains the attributive qualities of the totality. Let us apply to this new universe, this new macrocosm, the Great Arcanum. We will see that the instrument of this application will not change. Continuing to diminish thus the universe, we will contract it until it is limited to the operator itself. This is a replica of the world, the microcosm, and to him we can also apply the Great Arcanum. Now, the only instrument that the operator can use to act on his own microcosm is his physical body. This will be, therefore, the great Athanor of the Arcanum of Magic. The knowledge of the operation, however, is not enough. This is just the walking on the ground floor of the building. We have a good example of this in the history of King Oedipus. On his path he finds the Sphinx, asking him who in the morning walks with 4 feet, during the day with 2, and at night with 3 feet. The enigma symbolizes the director of the Great Arcanum. Let's look at the subject. The Sphinx represents the synthesis of the 4 sacred animals. It has the human face, the paws and claws of a lion, eagle's wings, and bull's hips. These creatures, by their attributes, condition the access to the astral world through the 4 elements they represent. The Sphinx is the astral. She is a watchful watcher of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid consists of the square of the elements. However, its triangular sides, delimited by the edges, symbolize the mental triangles, evolutionary processes which at their apex merge into oneness. The mental plane is protected, guarded by the astral. What was Oedipus's response? He answered that in the human body, which in childhood walks with 4 legs, in youth and adulthood with 2 feet, and in old age adds a third, the stick on which it is based. Oedipus only guessed the physical part of the enigma, and thereby acquired power only over the body of the Sphinx, which he later destroyed, proclaiming himself its conqueror. The future proved that he had not solved the astral binary of the Arcanum. The downside, polarized from the whirlwind, dragged him to the horrors of parricide and incest. The dominion over the physical plane only was not enough to prevent what happened. The initiation of the astral plane was given to him by suffering, and on the mental plane he attained peace through the mystery of universal love, the self-denial and dedication of his daughter Antigone. It is very significant that astral initiation reaches maturity, and mental as well, in old age. Returning to the graphic representation of the Great Arcanum, it is customary to complete it with 3 words, per or by the initials Tarot, Rota, Inri. And above that is Azoth, written in Hebrew. The first word, Azoth, is composed by the first ideogram of the 3 alphabets, the Hebrew, Aleph, Greek, Alpha, and Latin, A, which resemble phonetically, and the last letters of the same alphabets, namely Z from Latin omega from Greek, and tau from Hebrew. That word symbolizes the universal synthesis and is the motto of the alchemical school. The second word, tarot, essentially, is the name of the Bohemian deck, composed of 78 arcana, and is equivalent to the words rota, Torah, or Torah, Otar, Arot, or Aroth. And it represents the tradition that, for a misunderstanding, was called Oriental. The fourth word, Inri, on the mental plane, is read Iusus Nazarenus Rex Iudeorum. The Latin inscription on the cross of the Saviour. In the astral plane, it is read Igne Natura Renovatur Integra. The whole of the nature is renewed by fire. Here the term fire is understood according to the explanations given in this arcanum. The word Inri was the motto of the Rosicrucian school. The simultaneous presence of these words in the graphic representation of the great arcanum, the divine name, which is the key to the Hebrew Kabbalah, indicates that for both Kabbalists, as with the alchemists, both the tradition of the Bohemians and the Christian Enlightenment seek the same achievement and have the same unique aspiration, a single target. All these ways are included in the Great Arcanum.